And his music.
Evening, everybody. Evening, Martin. Hey, Karen, Carol, and Luann.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress.
Hey, Marion in Nashville. Hey, Kelly. Hey, Ian. Hey, Marita and Leah.
Berlin's greatest hit, Blue Skies.
Hey, Gladys. Thank you. Hey, Octavio. Hey, anybody who might be new. Hey, Tom. Hey, Patty. Hey, Nancy. I don't normally have a TV on in the background, but... Hey, Dory. Hey, Chuck. Erev Tov, Lisa. Hey, Jen. Hey, Heather. Hey, Dan and Diane. Good evening, Steve. Glad to have you here. Hey, Casey. Hey, Lynn, Tracy, Ethan, Betsy. I'm excited about this one. A lot of new stuff. A lot of new stories I got to research. Oh, thanks, Jordana. Hey, Savannah. Glad to have you here. Awesome, man. Hey, Kathy. Oh, yeah, I hadn't really done my hair yet. Hey, Christine. I've been just sitting at the desk all day. Putting this together, listing all these other tours. Congrats, Cindy. I'll turn this off when I actually start the tour proper. But am I going through a book on New York graves? That would be interesting. That might be an interesting thing to do. I don't know. A lot of this stuff seems like it's really been under-researched, honestly. I try to look these things up, and I don't really find as much as I would expect. Like New York ghost lore, like I was putting together for a while talking about doing like a tour of weird stories on the High Line, and there's a big, like fairly famous one that's in every article about it being haunted by the ghost of this one guy. I could find no evidence that the guy ever even existed, let alone be around to haunt anything. Yep, this is the book. All new. Ah! And man, it looks good too. Well, this handsome dude. See, we got topless guys in here for the book for you, even. Hey, Sue. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Ann. I'm really glad that I called this Volume 1 of this tour, because I feel like there was a lot that I couldn't get to. Savannah, I can believe it. There were some Capone site places in Michigan. There are some. But I don't think it's that well documented. Hey, Christy! My sister's fiance is here. And Christy is a pox expert at the CDC, so she's been awfully busy lately. Glad to have you here, Christy. Hey, Larry. Evening, Linda in Gettysburg. Book should officially hit stores in August, but apparently orders are going to start shipping pretty soon, from what they tell me. Evening, Eileen. Hey, Bob. So yeah, sounds like they're going to be pre-ordering pretty soon. I got a whole box of 20 of them here. I got to bring 5 or 6 over to Graceland. Hey, Mom. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, anybody new? We'll give it a few extra minutes before we get started today. But I hope people are watching the January 6th hearings. Hey, Amy. Hey, Kyle. Well, Rita, glad to hear that. It's a rather gruesome book to give a kid, but alright. Hey, Emily. Hey, Mary. Hey, Mona. Hey, everybody. I'm excited for this one, too. So all kinds of people I hadn't heard of, people I'd love to dig into in more detail. Hey, Bob. Congrats on the new laptop. Hey, Cheryl. Hey, Jamie. Would I ever consider Ghosts or Cemetery Tales from London or Scotland? That'd be harder for me to research. I wouldn't be able to do it as in-depth. If somebody hired me to do it, sure, I'd do it. The beeping is on the television. Yeah, it's impossible to not to make, like, unearthed and dug up jokes with this kind of stuff. I try not to get too into those. Hey, Joanne. Evening, Carrie in Fort Wayne. The pun is always intended, of course. Above you, who say. Yeah, it's weird trying to sing along with this while also they're showing gruesome footage here. Hey, Carrie. Hey, Kitty. Yeah, I was gonna take Manhattan. Just about all these are in Manhattan. I don't even know if we'll end up having time to spend much time over in Greenwood. I got a lot of footage from there. I don't love the footage I got there. It was really bright that day. We'll give it a shot. You're quite welcome, Eleanor. It was very fun to do Find the Grieve in Manhattan up at Trinity North, even though it's a hard place to find people in. You know, I got some General Grant footage, too. I could actually work that in. Right inside of the crypt, there's a great painting on the wall of Robert E. Lee surrendering. It's my favorite thing he ever did. Other than, you know, die. Now, the committee hearing is only supposed to go another 30 minutes tonight, so we'll only be able to see most of it. Footage they're showing is horrifying. Hey, Sherry. Hey, Rob. Hey, Oscar.
Which one? Ruffio or Runway?
Yes, my suitcase was still where I left it. Well, you know, if Galena had Grant, they would have that. Nobody goes to the one in New York, honestly. It's not that big of a tourist attraction anymore. Most New Yorkers I talk to are like, oh, that's here? I'm surprised how much new stuff we're getting in the hearings, honestly. So much is leaked out already. Carrie, I hear that. I think my mother's made memory of the Kennedy assassination, and she was mad that cartoons weren't on. Rob, ooh. We'll give this a couple of more minutes for more people to log on. Miles is sitting on my record player over here. Aren't you, Miles? Yeah. Of course, the itinerary I had with my school group. The itinerary I had with my school group had us spending about 6 hours at Grant's Tomb, which would be really difficult.
Now another one just in the same vein. Rosetta.
Hey, Mitch. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Heather. Charlotte used to try to scratch at the records. Miles isn't as bad about that. Hey, David, and yes, you are on the list for the Patreon. Forgot to email back, but yeah. You are on the list for the new 50 Ways to Die at Graceland Cemetery tour. I hope I actually get 50. I'm afraid it might be like 70 or 38 or something. Hey, Katie and Grace. Hey, Paula, thanks. Alright, I gotta get started pretty soon. I'm sure I'll get the summary of the rest of what happened tonight. We'll give it another minute or so, just because this is the time when everybody starts logging on. Or when they start sending me frantic messages saying, "Where are you? Aren't you broadcasting?" We get a lot of those when it's new people. Hey, Dirk and Kalamazoo. Eleanor, absolutely you can. Just go into your Patreon account and you can bump yourself up to a higher level easy. Kathy, maybe, if they send me any tours my way. I'm a freelancer anyway, so. Though I did find out that the group I had in New York all last week raved about me and said they definitely want me for their next tour in a couple of years. So that's nice. Hey, Frank. Hey, Scooby on YouTube. Well, thanks. Yes, I don't know that I have the truth about H.H. Holmes, but I'm a lot closer to it than a lot of the other stuff that's out there. Hey, Katie. It's always kind of unnerving when you turn up on Reddit for any reason. Eileen, that's awesome. Kennedy live stream? I don't know yet. I am going to be kind of cutting back on the morning full-length tours on Sundays. The numbers are down quite a ways right now, so... Oh, yeah, they pretty generally do want me back. Modesty aside, I'm pretty good at being a tour director. Well, the company that bought my previous company just wants to send me on, like, airport greeting gigs and stuff. Mona, send me an email, but basically, if you're on the tier, I don't really check that much. So, we have one more minute or so for Benny here. Alright, I am excited about this one. You know what, we're going to stop Benny in the middle of the song. I've let this go on long enough. We'll see you again later, Benny Goodman. But all right, everybody, welcome along. I think it is time that we just go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, the brand new Murder Maps USA, and, hey, where did I put it? Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, copies of which arrived today from the publisher. They tell me the official publication date isn't for a couple of months, but they'll probably start shipping out pretty soon. So pre-order now. Cemetery research is one of my very favorite things to do. You never run out of stuff to research in a cemetery. There's Graceland alone, there's about 175,000 people to research. All of those people did more than one thing. You can go on and on and on with this stuff. And of course, there's always other cemeteries as well. So that's where we find ourselves today. Now, I work in New York a couple of months out of the year. I spend as much time as I can going to the cemeteries to find these great stories. I was there a few times in the past month and tried to get all the footage I could to start doing some New York virtual tours. So it's been kind of a drawback for me. During the pandemic, when I started doing virtual tours, I had photos of the cemeteries, but not the kind of footage that I wanted to actually do a virtual tour properly. Now I've got about enough that I'm not even using all of what I've got here. I've got a lot ready to go. I'm really glad that I called this Volume 1 of this tour, because there's just a lot of them. We're going to start with a couple of the lesser-known cemeteries in Chicago and in New York. Sorry, muscle memory comes in. But here we are on 2nd Avenue. And if you go down this little alley, every now and then the gates are open. I just got lucky enough that they were on the day that I came in. Through the edge here is a place from 1831, this little hidden garden known as the New York Marble Cemetery. Now, in the 1820s, New York was having kind of a crisis. They were running out of places to bury people. At the time, most people who died were still buried in churchyards that got really overcrowded really quickly, as we'll see. They were stinking up all of Lower Manhattan. They were causing serious health risks all over Lower Manhattan. So, over the course of time, they started banning burials further and further up, but they also opened a couple of cemeteries, a couple of private ones incorporated around 1831 that were non-sectarian and open to the public. And one of those was this wonderful little garden called the New York Marble Cemetery. Now, there are no headstones here. It wouldn't have been anything like a cemetery that anybody had ever seen before. What you had here was just these walls full of marble slabs, Tuckahoe marble, and on these slabs were names. Then down below ground were crypts. And we do have like a cross section. You can see the wall there with the 3 slabs, and then down below, if you were to dig, you would get to the crypts. These are probably made out of brick arches. We'll see a couple of examples later on. So let's just take a look down here at what it looks like. I'm so glad it was open the day that I was there. You can rent this place out. It's like $2,500 for an afternoon or $10,000 at night, and it can't be anything spooky. Nothing Halloween related, no dark events. It's more for weddings, film shoots, stuff like that. Though they did mention like Shakespeare's plays specifically, so I suppose you could do the Scottish one, or Richard III, or Hamlet. Let's talk of graves and worms and epitaphs in Richard II. So among the wall vaults that we can see right here is Erin Clark. You can see that just next to me right here. Erin Clark was the first was a lottery operator by trade. He was making an awful lot of money running lotteries, which a lot of people did in the early 1800s, and he became the Whig Party's candidate for mayor and was elected in 1837, right as the economy was completely collapsing. Here's Erin Clark himself. So he was the first Whig Party mayor in New York, and the economy used to collapse every now and then, like the Panic of 1837, the Panic of 1857. Now, at the time, we didn't have things like the FDIC to make like safeguards to make sure it didn't get too bad. So as mayor, with the economy collapsing, he was into adding more ports, which would stimulate trade, but would also probably drive real estate prices up. Now, the opposition party, the Democrats, were divided into 2 factions, where there were the ones who favored direct relief, not like system improvements, and there were ones who favored no relief whatsoever, the Loco Focos. But since they were so divided, Mr. Clark was able to get voted in, but all the while he was seen as favoring the rich, which hurt him a lot, as did his intense hatred of immigrants. So, in a couple of elections in which there was lots and lots of fraud on both sides, there ended up being more election reform because the elections he was in was so messed up. He was sometimes referred to as the dancing mayor. I've never found a contemporary reference to him being called that, but it was known that he was always hosting balls at his house, was part of, trying to get in with a higher society, making the right kind of connections, but also inevitably favoring the rich. That didn't come up much in print at the time. So that's the New York Marble Cemetery. It is not to be confused with another one right around the corner on 2nd Street near 2nd Avenue. This is 2nd Street, here in the East Village. This is the New York City Marble Cemetery. This one that you see right behind the bush here is the one we're really going to be covering. The New York City Marble Cemetery is fairly similar. It's mostly vaults. You can see slabs on the ground indicating where the vaults are. But there are, in this case, a handful of upright monuments as well, kind of the old-fashioned sort. Now, but most of the cemetery is made up of these little slabs on the ground that you lift up, and then if you dig down, you'll find a door eventually. So these vaults under the ground were by far the most common way of burying people in Manhattan back in the old days. And quite a lot of the parks in New York were originally burial grounds, like Washington Square, Bryant Park. And it seems like every time they dig around those places, they start finding old crypts. Such as this one, which was found just a few years ago in Washington Square, just really a few blocks away from the New York City Marble Cemetery. And this one still had lots and lots of coffins in it. By then, everything had kind of rotted away on the inside of them. But really, a lot of the parks and a lot of the churchyards, and probably all the way down under to South Street, there's all these brick vaults underneath the ground that look about like this. And that's what they've got in the New York City Marble Cemetery vaults, too. Here's a picture of what it looks like when you dig down to one of them. You dig down and you see a door. The vaults on the inside do look about like this, just kind of plain brick. And we do have a couple of illustrations of what it was like in the 1850s when they got dug up. Here's a drawing of them digging all the way down, and a drawing of what it looked like on the inside. I'll kind of let your eyes adjust here for a second. But what you see here is this arched room with shelves all around the side, and on top of those shelves are caskets. Now, the reason that this was drawn in 1858 is that was the year they exhumed and moved their most famous resident at the New York City Marble Cemetery, which was James Monroe, former president of the United States. He died in New York and was completely broke at the time, so they put him into somebody else's family vault, the Gouverneur family vault, when he died in 1831. In those days, there was no pension for presidents, and speaking gigs were not quite as lucrative as they are now. But the governor of Virginia in the 1850s started arguing heavily that we should have him buried here, and finally, in what may have been a gesture like, see, we don't hate the South so much, as we were trying to say in 1858, he was exhumed. They did this at the crack of dawn so that there wouldn't be too many people paying attention, put the body into a new casket, and by the most accounts I could find, they put the whole original casket into the new casket. They didn't try to take the body out or anything. They just put the casket into a new casket, laid him in state for a couple of days, then sailed him off on a steamboat to Virginia. It's going to come up again later on, though. It connects to another story. So we no longer have that president buried in New York. The only one who is, I believe, is President Grant. But back at the beginning, I'm going to point this one thing out. Just to the left of this is a monument that used to be topped with a draped urn. It fell off or got removed a long time ago. But there is a guy buried here with one of the best names of anybody. A guy by the name of Preserved Fish. The story goes that the old legend was that a sailor found him in the water and adopted him and called him Preserved Fish because that's what he was. Really, it's an old Quaker name. It goes back to the days when people had names like Fight the Good Fight of Faith Johnson and like The Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want Brown. He was actually Preserved Fish Jr., pronounced Preserved, with the emphasis on ed. Born in 1766, named after his Quaker father, despite any legends to the contrary. Now, Preserved Fish didn't go to school for very long, worked at a bunch of trades that didn't last very long until he went off to sea. By the time he was 21, he was captain of a whaling ship. But then he found out you can make a lot more money selling whale oil than collecting whale oil, so he became a merchant instead. At one point, he testified in court. There was a court case that whale oil merchants shouldn't be paying fish oil taxes on the grounds that whales were not fish, which is correct, though the case failed. Later became very close friends with a guy in Flushing, Queens, then had a big fight with him, wouldn't talk to him anymore, and when he fell into the water one day, that same old friend dove in and brought him back out, and he was furious, like, I would rather have drowned than be saved by that guy. We don't know what they were fighting over anymore. But it cussed him out pretty good. He became the Harbour Master of the Port of New York, got married for a third time at the age of 73, just 4 months after his previous wife died, and said, I don't care a farthing for the opinions of the world, I live for the living, not the dead. Sentiment that would be echoed by Johann Hawk some years later. Such an eccentric guy, his wife didn't know that he had sisters until the reading of his will. But Preserved Fish, the Harbour Master, was a well-known guy partly just because of his name. Even in the 1800s, the early 1800s when he lived, the name preserved fish was still a really odd name, even then. But there aren't a whole lot of people buried in either the Marble Cemetery or the New York City Marble Cemetery. The New York City Marble Cemetery here has about 258 vaults, so at most they could probably get a couple of thousand people interred there. That's if they keep things kind of kosher, not like cram everybody together, jump up and down on top, as they often did in the churchyards. So why don't we move our way over to the churchyards? We'll start with perhaps the most famous Trinity Church, the current incarnation of the church designed by Richard Upjohn. For years, this spire was about the tallest point in Manhattan. It was a really big deal when they built the Brooklyn Bridge, and the big Brooklyn Bridge towers were going to be taller than Trinity Church. What you have here is a little churchyard. There's a smaller version of it that extends over on the other side. We'll see both of them over the course of this. Let's get a quick overview of what this looks like. Here it is from the front. Now, right in the middle of the financial district, the official name of this is Trinity Wall Street, though it's technically not exactly on Wall Street. Now, if you take a look at this, you would probably get the impression that we're looking at a couple hundred bodies, maybe as many as a couple thousand. But as of the 1820s, after a fire had destroyed all of the records, nobody could really say how many people were buried here. Estimates hovered around the 100,000 range. Now, people were just being stacked one on top of the other. 100,000 might not still be there because it was well known that every time they did some digging, they'd find bones and just put them into the bone pit that eventually haul them off into the East River or something like that. If you walk around the other side here, if you walk around the back, you can see how high up we are over the road here. See people walking along there, and then on the back side of this, if we were to hop down, you would see this wall. This is high above. The reason this is as high off of the ground as it is loaded with tombs and burials. There was a terrific time. There's a terrific article about a guy who was hired to pour quicklime all over the place. He brought in a crew to try to cover up the smell of the churchyard by pouring lime all over the place, and he wrote that the stench caused his men to cascade freely. Which is cascade is a word for puke that I really feel like should have survived a little bit better. It's impossible to know how many people there are here. I would say 20,000 is a reasonable estimate, but other people say 120,000. Some people say 200,000. I think they're mistaken there. I think that's just a reference to what the population was at the time they were trying to figure it out. But let's move around to the other side here and take a look at what kind of graves we've got in this place. What you see a lot of is stuff like these kind of vaults. Like if it's another situation, sort of like the crypts that we saw back at the other places. Some of them were originally above ground, like the Hercules Mulligan's family vault was originally above the ground, eventually got filled in and buried. Now, they just recently restored the Eaker family vault, so we do have some idea of what they look like. Like down below the church in the basement, you can walk around through here, while these caution watch your steps and all of these pipes. Then eventually you come to hallways that look like this. Only a few of the vaults are still currently accessible, but a few of them are, including the Eaker vault, which looks like this on the inside. Now, the Eaker family is buried underneath the gravel down below here, if there's anything left of them. What they can still use here is ashes. What they've got along the wall are coffin plates that were recovered, because really both the body and the coffin have probably completely withered away by now. But let's take a look at a couple of the graves up top. We'll start with one from the 7th grade section. Over on the north side of the church. Here's a guy, we don't know much about this guy except that his name was Abraham Cock. Since we're being funny, let's move over. This is really my favorite one that I've seen in a while. Move this up. We got this is called a death's head, representing the soul flying away, a particularly scowling one there. But the epitaph reads, "Sacred to the memory of Adam Allen, comedian, who departed this life February 15, 1768. This stone was erected by the American Company as a testimony of their unfeigned regard. He possessed many good qualities, but as he was a man, he had the frailties common to man's nature." Like, Wow, that's what you put on a guy's gravestone. He had some good qualities, but he was a man and possessed the frailties common to man's nature. We can really only speculate as to what these would have been. Other comedians from that era, we have a lot more anecdotes about them drinking and gambling and carousing. We don't necessarily have that. For all we know, they might have just been saying that he was mortal in this case. But it's kind of difficult to find data about this guy because we're not necessarily 100% sure that Adam Allen is really his real name. I mean, frankly, that's a great stage name. There are some things from 1752. A guy by that same name went bankrupt in London. That probably tracks. But what we have very few anecdotes about him or his life or anything. What we do have is a long list of plays that he was in. Just by going through theatrical notices in newspapers of the 1760s, we can find a lot of plays that he was in and even what part he played. For instance, Romeo and Juliet, he was in Romeo and Juliet quite a bit. He seems to have played Friar Lawrence quite a bit. Now, this is not exactly a comedy play, but you could theoretically do Friar Lawrence as a comedy piece. And we'll move down. He also did this one that same night, and this would be just a couple of weeks before his death, a farce called Miss in Her Teens, in which he was playing a character named Fribble. Now, there's just a movie made out of this starring Ian McKellen and Simon Callow, Miss in Her Teens. It's very much a farce. Miss in Her Teens is courted by a couple of people, one of whom is Mr. Fribble, who reminds me of, imagine Nathan Lane in The Birdcage, but doing sword fights. Definitely a comedic character. It gives us some idea of what kind of person this guy would have played. He's also known to have played Lord Chalkstone. A lot of characters made famous more by David Garrick than by him. But we can also see that he sang and danced from these notices. We see that his wife would occasionally play Lady Capulet now and then, and was also at work selling tickets even a couple of months after her husband's death. There was one case a few years before. He was announced to be performing a benefit performance of a comedy called A Stagecoach. And it also mentioned that the stagecoach would be, could also be described as the history of Mr. Allen and the Three Lawyers. Now, I haven't been able to read through all of the play yet, but apparently there's some kind of subplot about three lawyers, and Mr. Allen was going through something to do with three lawyers at the same time. So we can piece together little bits from this data, but still there's just not a whole lot that we know about Adam Allen, except for the fact that he possessed the frailties common to man's nature and has a really spooky looking gravestone for a comedian. It's the only gravestone I can think of from that era that actually says comedian right on it. Now, there are some ghost stories about this one. Some say that you can hear him cackling if you walk along the cemetery at night. But keep in mind, we're on Broadway here. There's a subway station right there. There's any number of ways that people could overhear somebody laughing without having to resort to ghostly stuff. Let's check out a couple of others here. This is the other side of the cemetery. We'll check out a couple of things over here. And of course, we'll play the hits. But I want to check this one out a little bit. These things tend to have very long epitaphs. This is referred to as marble, but it really seems more like it was slate or red sandstone. A lot of these things were made out of sandstone. But this marble designed with unambitious purpose, and chiefly to preserve the remembrance of his friends, his excellent disposition and amiable qualities, sacred to the memory of James Sadler, who was a dry goods merchant, died in 1803. But we'll move on from him and just kind of play the hit here. Alexander Hamilton. Now really, it's a whole family affair here. There used to, in fact, be more members of the Hamilton family who were moved to Brooklyn in 1876. But we've got the large monument to Hamilton. Next to him to the left is Eliza, his wife. And to the right is thought to be his son Philip, who was killed in a duel several months before he was killed in a duel. It's not known for sure. The records are all long gone. Philip Hamilton is presumed to be there and presumably somewhere near his father, but nobody's really 100% sure. Now, of course, he was shot by Aaron Burr, but really it is less known that before his duel with Aaron Burr, Hamilton also nearly got into a duel with James Monroe, the future president. Now, Monroe had been involved in the whole Reynolds affair, leading to the famous Reynolds pamphlet where Hamilton tried to explain away some payments to a guy by saying that he had an affair with his wife. Monroe had been involved in that. He and Hamilton challenged each other to duels over it pretty regularly for a couple of years. At one point, he said, "I'm going to come for you. Make sure you bring your second. I'll bring my second." And he did bring a second, a guy by the name of John Church, who we'll cover over here just briefly. Over on the other side of his Angelica Schuyler Church. They've got Angelica, Eliza, but not Peggy here, of the Schuyler sisters. Just on the other side, Angelica Schuyler Church. So her husband served as Alexander's second to a would-be duel with James Monroe. And in this case, it was actually Aaron Burr who talked them out of it. There was still some, apparently not too much bad blood, because Monroe eventually appointed one of Hamilton's sons to official positions. But in 1858, when they were moving James Monroe's body from the New York City Marble Cemetery out to the place in Virginia, the steamship encountered some storms, a lot of rocky weather, and there was even some danger that the ship was going to capsize and they would lose the body forever. They didn't, but one of the sailors fell overboard and drowned at one point. And that sailor was Lawrence Hamilton, a grandson of Alexander Hamilton. So it's almost like Monroe was getting revenge on the family from beyond the grave. And right over to the side of Alexander and Eliza is another of Hamilton's buddies, Hercules Mulligan. This is the time he fell and did not get back up again. Now, Hercules Mulligan was married at Trinity Church. He was a tailor who worked as a spy. He was a tailor who was working for the British during the Revolution, but in his capacity as tailor, he would pick up some bits of data here and there and pass them on to George Washington. He personally helped knock down the statue of King George III that was in the Bowling Green a couple of blocks south so it could be melted down to make bullets. Enslaved a guy named Cato for a while, but freed him in 1778, then became a staunch abolitionist, eventually buried in the Sanders family tomb, which was above the ground, but later on it was buried down below. This is about as close as you can get to it from right here. A guy who tends to be overshadowed now, because Hamilton being right there, but probably equally important in terms of the thrust of history. It's a guy by the name of Robert Fulton, shown here looking like the Romantic-era poet from the UK show Ghosts. He was the inventor of the first really successful steamboat back in 1807. But he's one of several people who can claim credit for having invented not only the steamboat, but the submarine. He is said to have been commissioned to build a submarine by Napoleon, but historical record kind of indicates that he interviewed with Napoleon about making a submarine, but Napoleon just kind of blew him off. It's kind of a running theme in stories in this tour, as a lot of people claimed closer connections to Napoleon than they actually had. He was very famous in France at the time, but he eventually switched sides and started working for the British in 1804, developing torpedoes. And he eventually married a woman by the name of Harriet Livingston, who was a part of the extended Schuyler family. He was 42, she was 19. He actually painted this portrait of her himself. Let's cover a couple others. This one's just interesting stylistically. James Barnes or Barnett. Just very nice style. It's said to have been reminiscent of the style of a guy named Ebenezer Price, who's well known for tombstones in the area. But frankly, it's a little more elaborate than most of his, and also way too early to have been by him. We'll check out the epitaph on here. Both old and young as well as I must in due time all burned be. All buried be. Under this body of cold clay, left in my prime, I'm called away. We'll see quite a few things like that over the course of this. There's a lot of rather dark things here. This is the oldest one in the cemetery, Richard Churchill, a kid who died in 1681. which is 16 years before this church was actually started. So this must have been moved from someplace else, probably an old family plot on the family farm or something. Not much is known about Richard Churchill. And it's actually a front and back gravestone. There's the epitaph on the front, then the back, there's a skull and crossbones. They were very into reminding people that they were going to die in these old epitaphs. It was kind of to give you a kick in the pants to become more religious. Let's just cover a couple others along those lines. Passing a faded old death's head, a rising sun. There's this other one, Mary Dalzell, the wife of James Dalzell, who died at the age 28 in 1764. Now, the epitaph reads, "Adieu, my dearest babes and tender husband dear." If you look close, they ran out of room, they had to move the deer up above the line. You see that a lot in these. "The time of my departure is now drawing near, and when I'm laid low in the silent grave, where the monarch is equal with the slave, weep not, my friends, I hope to be at rest. To be with Jesus Christ it is the best." Now, this appears to be original. It's not been found on any other gravestones. It hasn't been traced back to a poem or anything like that. And that's kind of unusual. Usually with these, it's a poem that you'll see on lots of other graves, or it can be traced back to one particular thing. We'll see a couple examples of the next place we're heading, just down the road, just up the road, in the shadow of the World Trade Center and the Oculus, which is a train station / shopping mall, and the most convenient bathroom break in the area, is St. Paul's Chapel, where George Washington went to church. Just in front of the church, you can see George Frederick Cook, the actor whose head was later loaned to theaters so he could play Yorick. I've covered that in other tours, so I'm not covering it tonight. We'll save him for Volume 2 of this one. We just did Grave Robbing 101. But we'll move over a little bit here. Right up at the front, the first notable one you see is George Eaker, who is a New York lawyer who is probably best known now for being the guy who killed Philip Hamilton in a duel. Now, he was a lawyer, and 4th of July, he made a speech that was, by some people, said to be just basic patriotic platitudes. Others say that he subtly insulted Alexander Hamilton. Philip Hamilton, Alexander's son, got mad, came up to him in a theater box and started ridiculing him. Eaker called him and his friend damned rascals. You don't call people a damned rascal and not get challenged to a duel. They actually had 2 duels. On day 1, nobody was hit. They dueled again on second 2 and shot, and this time Philip was struck. Now, George himself lived through the duel and actually worked fairly cordially with Hamilton for a little while, but got sick a few months later while working for the fire brigade, fighting a fire one late January night, and never quite recovered. He died of something that sounds about like tuberculosis just a few months before the Hamilton and Burr duel. Now, before that, he had been engaged. Before his death, he was engaged to Harriet Livingston, who, after his death, would instead go on to marry Robert Fulton, who we just saw a minute ago. You know, New York was really a fairly small town then. It was just about the size of a decent-sized suburb. So all of the prominent people were kind of mixed into each other's lives, whether they liked it or not. Most of the people buried here, though, are not notably prominent, not particularly famous. Some of them we don't really have even a little bit of data about. This is a girl by the name of Marin, the daughter of Adam Bennett. Now, it's kind of difficult to read this, but this is one that we can trace, which helps. What it says is, "Consider this, ye mourning parents, and dry up your tears. Why should you lament that your little ones are crowned with victory before the storm of adversity has begun? Oh, remember, they are lost, but they are not lost, but taken away from the evil to come." Now, this came from a book called James Hervey's Meditations on the Tombs. It was an 18th century book. He wrote a couple of books of poems and meditations about graveyards that were hugely popular. Quotes from it are all over this cemetery and all over cemeteries of the era. He was a huge influence on William Blake. He specifically cited Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright was influenced by James Hervey. Also Blake's paintings. I was only vaguely aware that William Blake was also a painter, but he did paint this, which was called the epitome of James Hervey's Meditations on the Tomb. Goth as all get out. Let's move on a bit. Just another interesting epitaph here. This one is a guy named Jon Jones. It's got that death's head symbolism of the soul flying away. Move in, it says, O most cruel and sudden death that did take his harmless breath, but the Lord hath thought it best to take his soul with him to rest. Now, as early as the 19th century, only a few decades after his death, it was said that this was written by his wife. I don't know how they would know that, though. And then there's James Wereland. Just up on the other side. I couldn't find a thing about James Wereland. But his says, how loved, how valued, once availed thee not. It's missing the last two letters there. But to whom related or by whom begot, a heap of dust alone remains of thee. 'Tis all thou art, and all the proud should be. This is from a poem, Elegy to the Memory of an Unfortunate Lady by Alexander Pope, who also coined the phrase, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. He's kind of underrated. There's a lot of quotes that come from Alexander Pope. We'll also cover just one more or two particularly generic ones. John and Mary Cummings. John says, weep not for me, my children dear. I am not dead, but sleeping here. My debt is paid. On this you see. Prepare for death and follow me. There's a lot of variations of that one. I even see them in Chicago occasionally, but in the 18th and early 19th century, variations on this prepare for death and follow me were very common. Mary's is also one that turns up a lot with minor variations. Affliction sore long time I bore, physicians were in vain, till God was pleased to give me ease and free me from my pain. Now this one, nobody knows who wrote it, but it was well known enough that Charles Dickens could make a joke on it. In David Copperfield, he talks about going to church and would talk about reading all of the things on the wall, including the one for Mr. Blodgers. Physicians sore Mr. Blodgers bore, and physicians were in vain. And he wondered if the physicians were still going to church and liked to be reminded of their general failure once a week like that. Similarly, these kinds of things got to be so common that they inspired a lot of jokes of that nature. There's one list of epitaphs that says there was one like this, prepare for death and follow me, onto which somebody had added in pencil, to follow you I'll not consent until I know which way you went. Now, often confused with Trinity Churchyard, but not really affiliated and clear on the other side of town, is the Uptown Trinity Church. Just get this overview of it here, going way up the hill at about 127th Street, way up in Washington Heights. We'll hit a couple of people here. This is W. Astor. Now, Mr. Astor inherited an absolute fortune. His father, John J. Astor, is elsewhere in the cemetery. He wasn't super into business himself. He thought he would just take his money and pretty much live on the yacht, which is what he did. This is a cool, very cool vault. We'll take a kind of walk up and get a closer look. Now, in the tomb with him is his son, John Jacob Astor IV, seen here with his much younger wife, whom he took with him on the Titanic. There was a lot of gossip about these two on Titanic. John Jacob Astor IV was 47 years old. His new wife, Madeline, was 18 and already pregnant. When the ship went down, John is said to have given his seat to Ida Hippock, who is buried at Rose Hill Cemetery, a few blocks away from where I am right now, and his body was actually recovered later on. There's one of a couple of different Astor tombs nearby. There's one just a marker that says Astor Vault, where John the First is. It's kind of confusing researching these guys, because over here is John J. Astor III. There was no John J. Astor Jr. As near as I can tell, it just skips from John Sr. to John III. There may have been like a junior who died young or something. But John J. Astor, buried right nearby here, was a dealer in fur, flutes, and opium, and had so much success that his wife is said to have been accused of witchcraft, though I can't really find a primary source on that. Let's move up the hill a little ways to where we went to Find a Grave Friday this Friday. Man, I'm glad I made this volume 1. We'll go running up that hill, running up that road, to the grave of Mercedes de Acosta, one of the earliest out and proud lesbians in the United States. She was an artist and writer, well known, not so much for her art, but within artist and writer circles in her day in the 1910s. Wrote that she thought when she was a boy, when she was a girl, she thought that she was a boy. She was raised as a boy named Raphael, and it wasn't until she was about 7 that she found out that she had been what we would now call assigned female at birth. Told the nuns at the convent where she went to school that she really didn't know whether she was a girl or a boy or neither or both. And of course, we didn't really have the language or the vocabulary to deal with that kind of issue at the time. But by the 1910s, she was openly identifying as a lesbian, carried on affairs with people like Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich, is said to have bragged that she could steal any woman away from a man. She's made her a very controversial figure for fairly obvious reasons. People for years talked about her as this leech who endlessly harassed Greta Garbo. Though Alice B. Toklas, the girlfriend of Gertrude Stein, said, "Say what you will about Madeline, she had some of the most important women of the 20th century." There's a great anecdote that she wrote in her book that when a girl was teasing her about having her sister be divorced, she said, "Well, I'd rather have a divorced sister than be like you and have a father who owns a grocery store." That's a good line. There's some interesting graffiti visible from just over the edge of the road here. You can see this graffiti, "Sex work is work," which is not only true, it is also appropriate for the mausoleum right over here. Of a person that I'd been, this is what the first time I came to the cemetery, this is what I wanted to find, was the mausoleum of Eliza Jumel. Now, we often hear that in the United States, you can be raised in a brothel and go on up to the highest rungs of society. It's not really clear that anybody of her era did that except for Eliza Jumel. Well, Eliza was raised in Rhode Island, where her mother worked in or ran a series of brothels, and eventually she was arrested and Eliza was put into a workhouse. Moved to New York after her parents died, became an actress, eventually became a very famous member of high society. I first found out about her looking through the New York Herald. I found this ad for Madame Jumel's Memorial Balm and Patent Breast Elevator. Develop the form physiologically. Depot 363 Canal Street. Send for circular. Sold by druggist. Agents wanted. That just got me curious, and I ended up falling into this story about this woman, Eliza Jumel, who, with her husband in 1815, they moved over to Paris and later bragged that they were very, very close with Napoleon. Once again, probably really exaggerating. She had married a wealthy merchant by the name of Stephen Jumel. She learned a little bit of French, but after about a year, she went back without him and took to managing his business affairs. His investments didn't turn out too well. The family was on the verge of ruin, but through her own canny investments, she managed to save the family fortune. Now, eventually Stephen died. She became the first important collector of European art in America. Now, here at Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, we've got a lot of big art collectors. Ava Kimball, Bertha Palmer, Annie Coburn. Eliza kind of started that. Then she kind of shocked everybody late in life when she married Aaron Burr, the former vice president. The general sense is that he was marrying her for her money, and she was marrying him for the status. She wanted the status of being married to the former vice president, even if it was, Aaron Burr. They got married, got divorced shortly thereafter. The divorce was finalized on the day that Aaron Burr died. Eliza had been represented by Alexander Hamilton Jr., who had actually met Abraham Lincoln in 1835. He said that he had been working as a lawyer in Illinois and saw this young kid Lincoln lying on a counter and telling stories, which pretty well tracks. But here's a cool thing about Jumel, as you can see right in. We'll kind of go tomb snooping here. This is also a good look, really, at what the crypts under the Marble Cemetery and what most of the crypts in Trinity Cemetery probably look like on the inside. Hello, Ginger. Oh, hey, Alex. We'll just cover briefly just a couple briefly. Up here across the river in Greenwood, across the bay. Greenwood is by far the largest cemetery of them covering today. It has about 600,000 burials. Formed in 1838, was really the first proper public park in Manhattan where people would just go for leisure, probably inspired Central Park. Gates designed by Richard Upjohn. There's a colony of parrots who live inside of these places. And in it is the John Church Hamilton vault. John Church Hamilton was Alexander's son. Lawrence Hamilton, the guy who drowned while accompanying the body of President Monroe, is in this vault. Initially, apparently, he was at Trinity, but he was moved in the 1870s. I'm just having trouble getting good sources on that. We'll cover just a couple of things in here. This one, I don't know what I've done with the filter here. Probably just because it's so bright. Now, we often cover at Graceland Cemetery the Schoenhofen Pyramid, which has a sphinx in front of it. This is the Albert Ross Parsons Pyramid. Now, you got a Sphinx here, you've got baby Jesus and grown-up Jesus. The Sphinx looks less like Mikhail Gorbachev than the one that we've got. Now, Albert Ross Parsons was an amateur Egyptologist. He wrote a book called New Light from the Great Pyramid, the astronomico-geographical system of the ancients recovered and applied to the elucidation of history, ceremony, symbolism, and religion, with an exposition of the evolution from the prehistoric objective scientific religion of Adam Kadmon, the macrocosm of the historic subjective spiritual religion of Christ Jesus, the microcosm. You can get this book on Google Books. I tried to read it myself. I did not get past the preface. I could not figure out for the life of me. I think he's trying to say that all religions basically came out of the same one original religion, though he was more into Christianity than the other ones. But I couldn't make heads or tails of it. That's a pretty good example of what the writing is like in there. And you know, this takes me over time, so we got a lot of other stuff to cover. I got a lot of things to move to Volume 2. We'll maybe do that in a couple of weeks. So, let me just plug the upcoming stuff. We got a lot of new stuff. I kind of committed myself. It's going to be all new material in June. So, next week is a new one that I tried for a library once already, but haven't done publicly. North Shore Ghost Lore. All ghost stories and murder stories and unsolved mysteries from the North Shore suburbs here in Chicago. That's the next virtual one. The next in-person one, Sunday night, H.H. Holmes, The Devil Downtown, tracing H.H. Holmes' real career through buildings we can actually trace him to around the Loop here in Chicago. June 19th, we got 2 tours, doubles. Somebody requested Grave Robbing 101 and had a pretty large group, so I said, okay, I'll list it. So that morning, we'll be doing a new route at Rose Hill. It'll have, I'd say probably 50% is stuff that I've had on Rose Hill tours before. I mean, some of the stuff you just can't walk by and not mention. But I'm trying to work as many new things into it as possible, a whole new route. So that'll be like, we're calling it the blue route. The previous one was the red route. Maybe I can make a couple others. Then a week after that, first event since I have gotten my grubby little hands on the Graceland Cemetery book, a brand new one called 50 Ways to Die at Graceland. We're going to cover different causes of death. I hope I get to 50. It might be 38, it might be 70. Once we've done it a couple of times, we'll know a little bit better. So that's all stuff coming up. Go to adamchicago.com and that'll get you tickets to all of those. Should you want a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., try to be half as cool as Luca here, go to cafepress.com/Mysterious Chicago. They will hook you up with whatever you need with the Mysterious Chicago logo on it. And with that, everybody, I should really make this the proper size. But we will just hang out here. The Patreon is your best bet. You get up to 4 surprises in your email box per week, depending on your tier, plus tickets that cost less than we're actually charging here, charging for tickets. So, thanks everybody. I'm Adam. Here is Benny Goodman. Ronnie, about 8 people say bless you for sneezing. Thanks, Kristen. Good luck to Luca at their swim meet. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, we didn't even get too far up into Greenwood today. I just kept finding new connections to James Monroe. What can I say? It's always like the weird things like that. Like Edwin Booth comes up on a lot of my tours. President Benjamin Harrison comes up on a lot of my tours. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Ashley and Lindsay. Thanks, Tracy. I think we'll do part 2 in 2 weeks. And then the 30th is going to be a Pride Month time travel pub crawl. I need some more artists to do. I'm having trouble finding the right artist to do music for that one. Well, Alex, I hope you showed them what for. You know, in my day, we didn't have ray guns to fight Martians with. We had to use sticks. Of course, nowadays, if you touched a stick, your mom would probably scrub your behind with disinfectant until it was shiny as a Roosevelt dime. Our behinds were never shiny, and we didn't complain. Thanks, Jordana. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Gilly. I learned a lot doing this one, too. Thanks, Kay. Okay, Kristen's been in the comments. I didn't run into her in New York. Any chance of doing in-person tours in New York? Possibly. This year I didn't, but often when I'm in New York with a school group and have a night off, I'll just list a walking tour for there for Grave Robbing 101. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, DePoor. Oh, yeah, we got to get Miles out here. Miles, your contractual obligation demands that you come hang out a little bit, buddy. Here's the guy. Ah, yeah, show him the fang. Ooh. Ooh, yeah. Smiles. Well, thank you, Christine. Glad you guys liked it. I liked putting this one together. There's just so many other epitaphs at St. Paul's that I could cover, too. A lot more by James Hervey. You find James Hervey quotes all over the place.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Thanks, Bill. It's tough. There's so many cool gravestones at Trinity and St. Paul's where you just can't find much data about who these guys were. Or you really dig and finally find out they were a merchant. Where do I stay when in New York? Different places all the time. I'm at Row NYC in Midtown quite a bit. That's like the one that school groups use. Personally, I like the Club Quarters chain. I stayed at this place, Americana Inn, that was really more of a hostel last week. Really, the next ones will be more stuff at the same ones. How many miles have I walked? That I don't know, but I know that while I was in New York, I averaged about 25,000 steps a day.
We had to have someone new, a dance to chew up here in Harlem. So someone started trucking.
I'm pretty tired, so I'm going to make it a pretty quick post-tour hang tonight. But let's hang out a few more minutes. While I plug once again the PayPal and especially the Patreon. That's your best bet.
You
Oh yeah, back then there was vaccinations, antibiotics, and sanitation have all played a really big role in getting childhood mortality rates way down from what they were before. People who lived past 20 still generally lived longer lives back then. But what really skews the life expectancy back then was so many people didn't make it to 5. Drinking a Manhattan tonight, appropriately.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
But usually I'm staying on somebody else's nickel, so I gotta keep it, reasonably frugal. Do we know we were going for Find a Great Friday? No, I haven't even thought about it yet. I've been too busy with all these other things. Now, people in the old days still, if they lived past 5 and lived long enough to know that they were supposed to get 70, they expected to get 70, despite all evidence to the contrary. I want to do more in Woodlawn. I want to do more at Calvary in Queens, which is the one from that Sarah Bareilles song. They built a cemetery in the center of Queens, with Manhattan behind her. Skyscrapers, little tombstone brothers. I love that line. Skyscrapers, little tombstone brothers. Oh, Gary, it was like that everywhere. The city had more issues with sanitation. You had like cholera infantum and malaria, which was, well, cholera infantum was malaria. Typhoid fever and stuff, that was probably worse. Infectious diseases were probably worse. Savannah, thanks for signing up for the Patreon. Octavio might have missed the question. Castle Garden, the one in Battery Park. Yep, I've been through. It was mostly just tickets for the Statue of Liberty there now. Hi, Laura. Those of you just joining us, we're now in the post-show hangout. It was actually at 8 o'clock Central. Essie, I'm sorry. It's true, I do suck. Priya is hanging around here someplace. Oh, Jenna, that few coffee bourbon stuff is great. That stuff's delicious.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And
good night, Janine.
To Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
I'll let Ellen Ward sing this song before I take off. And Kristen, I haven't been to Calvary. I know it's like enormous. It's in the song. With Manhattan behind her, 3 million stunning reminders. There. Pick Miles up off of the box of Graceland Cemetery books. Now, if someone's just going to come by and say I suck once, I'm not going to go to the trouble of banning them. See you tomorrow, Gary. Semper Fi. High and low, hear it everywhere you go, any time of day.
Big Ben rings
dance miles.
Miney Mo, catch the trouble by the toe. If the hollers let it go, let it fly away.
Now, my favorite was still that guy at when I was at Grant's Tomb saying, "Adam, you badmouthed my President Trump, so goodbye." Like, okay, goodbye. Don't come back. I didn't mean to badmouth him. I meant to shit talk him. All right, everybody. Quick plug again for the upcoming tours. Upcoming tours include, next week we'll do North Shore Ghost Lore, and the week after that, I guess we'll do New York Volume 2. Also coming up, we've got H.H. Holmes' The Devil Downtown on Sunday. We have got New Route at Rose Hill and Grave Robbing 101 on June 19th. And the day after the Dead and Company play 2 shows at Wrigley Field. 4 blocks up, we will do 50 Ways to Die at Graceland Cemetery on June 26th. Thanks everybody who's been buying tickets. Thanks to all the people who've been hitting me up on the Venmo and the Patreon, helping to keep these things free and frequent. And until tomorrow morning, everybody, we'll be back tomorrow morning with Find a Grave Friday. So until then, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago, saying to stay safe, stay strong, but of course, most of all, you gotta stay spooky. Have a good night, everybody.